Hello and welcome to Euronews Tonight. Here are our headlines. Stop Putin's war. Ukraine's President Zelensky urges Italy's parliament to push for more sanctions and help save millions of lives. The battle for Kiev intensifies. Ukraine says it's retaken the key suburb of Makariv, but Russian forces are moving closer into other areas just outside the Ukrainian capital.
Here in the Cube, a report says that new users on TikTok are being fed misinformation about the war within minutes.
And Alexei Navalny sentenced to 9 more years in prison for fraud. The Kremlin critic now urges people to take action against Putin's regime. Welcome to the program. I'm Stefan Grobe. President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for greater international pressure on Russia as fierce fighting continues in Ukraine. In a video address to the Italian parliament, Ukraine's leader urged lawmakers to hit Moscow with yet more sanctions and help bring an end to the war. After receiving a standing ovation from MPs, Zelensky expressed his gratitude for Italy's support for Ukrainian refugees. But he warned that Russia's invasion could spread further into Europe if President Putin isn't stopped.
The invasion has been going on for 27 days, practically 1 month. Therefore, we need even more sanctions, even more pressure, so that Russia stops looking for more military reserves or mercenaries somewhere in Syria or Libya and starts looking for peace.
With more on this, I'm now joined by our correspondent, Georgia Orlandi in Rome. Good evening, Georgia, and good to see you. So President Zelensky gave another strong address and said he was grateful for Italy's support for Ukraine. How was his speech received in Rome?
Well, hi, Stefan. Well, more than a speech, Zelensky's address really sounded like an appeal to the Italian parliament, calling for increased help to support Ukraine. He reminded Italian lawmakers of the devastation, the destruction caused by the war. He also mentioned 117 children that have been killed since the beginning of the conflict. And as you mentioned there, clearly, he stressed the importance of carrying on with sanctions against Moscow. We also heard from Italy's Prime Minister Mario Draghi, who said that the Italian parliament and the Italian government have been supporting Ukraine since the very beginning of the conflict. And for the first time, he openly said that Italy wants Ukraine to be in the European Union. So for the first time, he openly endorsed that possibility. But Zelensky's planned address had already caused a bit of a political debate over here in Italy. Several lawmakers decided not to attend today's session. Among them, there were members of Italy's ruling coalition, including as well members of the League Party. We know that some of them, 20 lawmakers or so, described this as a marketing operation. They criticized the decision of the Italian parliament to send arms to Ukraine, and they said that these would not help to restore peace in the country. Now, mentioning the League Party, we all know that several years ago, Matteo Salvini was described as one of Putin's closest ally here in Europe. He has changed stance recently over the war, and that's because clearly of Mario Draghi's pro-NATO line, if you will. But despite that, so he condemned Russia's attack in Ukraine, but despite that, clearly the whole issue, Stefan, has been pretty much under the spotlight in the past few days.
And Zelensky reportedly asked Pope Francis to play a mediating role between Russia and Ukraine. Is this a realistic option, and how could it play out?
Well, that doesn't seem to be a remote possibility in a way if you think that the Vatican spokesperson reiterated the Holy See's willingness to act as a mediator in negotiations to put an end to the conflict. The Church has been doing quite a lot. If you think of the Pope's appeals for peace, the Pope's prayer initiatives, he proclaimed Ash Wednesday, which this year falls on the 2nd of March, an international day for prayer and fasting, but also he's had continued contacts with the Apostolic Nuncio in Kiev, something very meaningful in this case. We know also that today President Zelensky got the chance to speak to Pope Francis over the phone. He told him about the very difficult humanitarian situation in the country and insisted on that once again. He said that the Holy See would be welcome to act as a mediator. He also invited him to pay a visit to Ukraine, something that, given how difficult the situation is on the ground for now, seems to be on hold. Stefan?
All right, Giorgia Alandi there in Rome, our correspondent. Thank you very much for this update. Explosions and gunfire again rocked Ukraine's capital as Russian forces continue their attempt to encircle Kiev. The city streets are deserted. Residents have been ordered to take shelter until Wednesday morning under a 35-hour curfew. In the surrounding area, fierce fighting still rages. Ukraine says its troops have retaken the strategically important suburb of Makariv, along with control of a key highway in the northwest. Russia says it's moved on in several areas northwest of the capital. For the latest on the situation in Kiev, let's cross to our international correspondent, Annalise Borges, who is there on the ground. Good evening, Annalise, as always. Good to see you. We understand that the battle for the capital is intensifying, with both sides claiming military achievements. How is the situation tonight?
Hi there, Stefan. As you mentioned, both sides claiming gains and all that information very difficult to verify while we are in curfew, effectively locked in our hotels and other accommodation. But what we saw today, and especially what we heard today, were the constant sounds of artillery fire, those loud explosions, those loud bangs getting ever so close to the center of Kyiv. And we also got an opportunity to leave and to get to the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital for a few moments. We were given a pass, and we saw a thick, large plume of smoke in the horizon, signaling that indeed that fighting continues in the suburbs of Kyiv. And as you mentioned, Russian troops claiming they have taken some suburbs, the Ukrainian army saying that they have managed to rebuff and control areas that were once occupied by Russian troops, including the suburb of Mushun and, of course, that city of Makariv to the west of Kyiv. That is a city that sits about 60 kilometers to the west of here, and that is very important if confirmed. Why? Because up until now, Russia's strategy seems to have been to try to encircle Kyiv. They had been advancing from the east and from the northwest, and while Makariv sits right on the way for Russian troops to indeed encircle Kyiv, to advance towards the south of the Ukrainian capital. So indeed that would be a very important victory for Ukrainian soldiers if they are indeed in control of that town and of that highway. But once again, the situation is very, very volatile. The fronts keep moving constantly. What we do know is what we see and hear from the center of Kyiv, and that is a significant amount of smoke in the horizon and those constant sounds of shelling that are almost uninterruptedly.
Annalise, elsewhere the fighting continues as well. Are Russian forces advancing despite Ukrainian resistance?
Well, there are reports of Russian tanks already in the center of Mariupol. That is where the most dramatic accounts are coming from. We hear of that constant shelling of the southeastern city, a port city, a very vibrant city before this war. There are accounts that report that Mariupol is currently being bombed every 10 minutes. Every 10 minutes there's a bomb falling in most of the time civilian infrastructure as well. The mayor of Mariupol saying that 80% of the city has now been damaged. Residents that are managing to flee, they have no running water, no food, no electricity. We also got reports from the city of Kherson in the south of Ukraine. That is another city that is said to be currently occupied by Russian soldiers, and there residents have been trying to put up some resistance. They have been protesting, Stefan, in the streets of Kherson. And there are images on social media showing those demonstrators being met by gunfire earlier today. Those areas are currently off limits to most journalists. It's very difficult to access those points. Indeed, Russian troops have not allowed journalists to approach any of those besieged areas. But once again, the Ukrainian president had asked for Ukrainian citizens to resist, to try and stand for their rights and defend their country. But of course, that is a very tall task to ask for some of those residents. Many of those who were left behind here are the elderly, the vulnerable, and of course they stand no chance in the face of a force that has no problem bombing maternity hospitals and theaters. Stefan?
All right, Annelies Borges, our international correspondent from Kiev. Thank you very much. A humanitarian crisis is unfolding in Ukraine. To date, there are at least 6.5 million people who've been forced to flee their homes because of the war. Residents who've remained in some of the worst affected cities, such as Mariupol, have been left without electricity or water and are facing dwindling supplies of food and water. And the situation is only getting worse. For more on this, let's go over to Florian Syriax, who's a spokesperson for the International Committee of the Red Cross and who joins us from Vinnytsia in central Ukraine. Good evening, Florian, and thanks for coming on. Tell us about the situation as you're seeing it each day.
Well, we see major needs all over the country. We see people who have been forced out of their home, people who are fleeing. Many of them, they are leaving their places with really limited supply. We talk about sometimes just a bag on their shoulders with the ID card, a bottle of water, and maybe a few clothes. So many of those people, they reach places like Dnipro, and we see a lot of people at the train station who are forced to stay there because they are waiting for a train, for a way out. So we have a lot of people who need immediate assistance, like food, basic supply, mattresses, blankets. So this is one part of the needs that we see across the country for all the people who are currently displaced, in addition to critical needs also in places like Mariupol and other cities for people who are in shelter, who have extremely limited, if any, food or water left at the moment.
Florian, what are your challenges? How is the Red Cross helping civilians to survive?
Well, the International Committee of the Red Cross was working already in the country since 2014, but mostly in the eastern part of the country. So it's been a challenge to reallocate all these resources, make sure that we were able to allocate them to the right places where we are able to work, where we see the most important needs. Then it's important to identify suppliers to make sure that we have the logistics, or also to bring all the aid inside. So it means also a lot of trucks, a lot of warehouses in different locations, like in the place where I am, we have this large warehouse, and we have trucks that come on a very regular basis, either to send aid or to take this assistance and send it to other locations in the country. So we have a lot of such challenges, and of course ensuring that once we are going to deliver this aid, it can be done safely.
All right, Florian Syriax, spokesperson for the International Committee of the Red Cross. Thank you so much for being on the program tonight. Euronews has joined the long list of independent media that have been blocked from broadcasting in Russia. Following the introduction of a new law against so-called fake news, Russian authorities have pulled all Euronews' language channels off the air and blocked access to our websites. In a statement released today, Euronews said it stands by its coverage of the war in Ukraine and strongly rejects all allegations of fake news. Russian President Vladimir Putin's most prominent political opponent, Alexei Navalny, has been sentenced to 9 years in a maximum security prison. The judge also ruled that Navalny will have to pay a fine of more than 10,000 euros after he was convicted of fraud and contempt, charges his supporters say are fabricated. The 45-year-old is already serving a 3.5-year sentence for breaking bail conditions while he was recovering in a German hospital after being poisoned with the military-grade nerve agent Novichok. For more on this, let's go to our Russia analyst, Galina Polonskaya. Great to see you, Galina, and good evening. So tell us more about today's hearing and the reaction from Navalny's camp to it.
Good evening, Stefan. Well, Navalny's supporters were furious but not surprised. Alexei Navalny's press secretary, Kira Yarmish, told me that she believes that it was a direct order from Vladimir Putin to keep Alexei Navalny in prison as long as possible. And his allies now say that they will do everything they can to make him be released in the nearest future, and announced that they create a global anti-corruption foundation. This organization in Russia is banned and labeled extremist. So Alexei Navalny will move to another colony with conditions which are much more harsh, and he is accused of stealing millions of euros of money from his donators. He himself says that all of the charges are false, that he is innocent, and his lawyers say that the whole case is being fabricated. Journalists today were not allowed in the courtroom, Stefan, and they could hear what is happening via a web link, but there were almost no words they could understand. And when the lawyers came out, they could say just a couple of comments, and after they were detained, the police explained that they were blocking a road. In a tweet after this sentence, Alexei Navalny wrote that the best support for him would be not sympathy but actions. He tweeted that he spoke about actions in this tweet against Putin's regime and urged for any opposition to the criminals of war.
Galina, very, very briefly, we're hearing that Russian Nobel Prize winner Dmitry Muratov will sell his medal and donate it to Ukrainian refugees. What has been the reaction in Moscow to this?
Well, many tweets, many messages on Telegram, but the mainstream state media are not reporting a word on this. Dmitry Muratov announced the news in his Novaya Gazeta, and he also reminded that there are more than 10 million refugees and urged for a ceasefire, a swap of the prisoners. And he also reminded that it was very important to help those refugees which are suffering right now in Ukraine. The authorities did not comment, but Russia's communications watchdog released today a statement saying that it informed Novaya Gazeta that there was a warning issued against it because it did not label one of its articles a foreign agent. And if there is a second warning like this, this could be a legal reason to close the media.
All right, our Russia analyst Galina Polonskaya, thank you very much. Financial institutions in the Dutch finance ministry froze funds linked to Russian nationals who were targeted following the invasion of Ukraine. The measure is expected to impact almost 200 clients, and more asset freezes are expected. The Netherlands relies heavily on Russian oil, and Prime Minister Mark Rutte has previously expressed concerns over Russian energy embargoes. A report suggests new TikTok users are fed misinformation about the war in Ukraine within 40 minutes of them signing up to the platform. Matthew in the Cube has the latest.
Well, Stefan, like other social media platforms, TikTok has been restricted in Russia. Users can no longer upload new content nor see any videos published from abroad. There are concerns that this move will only allow pro-Kremlin propaganda to spread online. But a new report has also found that TikTok users elsewhere in Europe are still seeing misinformation about the war. This study was produced by NewsGuard. They found that within just 40 minutes of signing up, new users on TikTok were seeing misleading videos about the war in Ukraine. This resulted from things like just scrolling through the platform and seeing videos about either Ukraine or Russia. Eventually, NewsGuard found that TikTok's algorithms, the things that keep people on the platform, were feeding these new TikTok users misleading videos. And these NewsGuards say that these misinformation, it ranged from things to do with videos from pro-Kremlin propaganda suggesting that Ukraine is falsely a neo-Nazi state, to videos like this one, which has simply been taken out of context and actually shows footage from 2014. Shinlabe from NewsGuard told me while the scale of this misinformation is so concerning.
We saw all sorts of misinformation. The problem really is that they were all mixed with one another. We even saw some reliable news information briefs about the war, but everything was just put next to one another with no context, no information. And so it's very troubling to see that for a user of TikTok, and we know that a lot of TikTok users are very young, it's very difficult to distinguish between false and reliable information.
Now, TikTok has responded to that NewsGuard report. They say that the experiment doesn't effectively demonstrate how people use their platform. And in a statement, they also said they are continuing to respond to the war in Ukraine with increased safety and security resources to remove harmful misinformation and help keep it a safe experience on TikTok. But that NewsGuard report is just the latest to say that platforms are not doing enough. Stefan, NewsGuard have called for more open transparency on not just how TikTok's algorithms work, but also how they are tackling misinformation. And also, more importantly, media literacy tools to help younger users understand what they are seeing when they are scrolling on TikTok.
Matthew in the Cube, thank you very much. And now we'll leave you with a no comment from Diyarbakir in Turkey, where hundreds of thousands of Kurds celebrated the traditional spring festival of Nowruz. Thanks for watching Euronews Tonight. Goodbye. Russian President Vladimir Putin's most prominent political opponent, Alexei Navalny, has been sentenced to 9 years in a maximum security prison. A judge also ruled that Navalny will have to pay a fine of more than 10,000 euros after he was convicted of fraud and contempt. Charges, his supporters say, are fabricated. The 45-year-old is already serving a 2.5-year sentence for breaking bail conditions while he was recovering in a German hospital after being poisoned with the military-grade nerve agent Novichok. Okay.